Hi everyone, welcome back to Tech Booth. Today we are looking at shooting log, color correction, color grading, and using LUTs. Log stands for logarithmic, so log footage is logarithmic footage. Log is a picture profile or a color profile in your camera, and it results in an image that looks really washed out. It doesn't have contrast, it doesn't have saturation, and basically looks really bad coming out of the camera. Even though log footage looks really bad coming out of the camera, the reason we shoot in this color profile is because it preserves your highlights and your shadows. What this means is that your image has much more detail, even though it doesn't look so good coming out of the camera. Those details are important when it comes to post-production processing like color correction and color grading. Each camera manufacturer have their own log profile. So Sony has the S-Log, Lumix have the V-Log, and Canon have their C-Log color profiles. Shooting log is not really necessary to get good footage. You can always use the other color profiles that you have in your camera, and you can get footage that looks good straight out of the camera as long as you know how to use your camera in setting exposure, focus, and all those other details. But what shooting in log allows you to do is to get enough detail for you to be able to post-process the image without it falling apart and looking nasty when you try to make adjustments to it to make it look a certain way. Let's look at the process and some of the issues surrounding shooting log. The first thing is that not all cameras have the ability to shoot log. So if you want to do this, make sure you check first to see if your camera supports log shooting. Some cameras are sold without the color profile, but you can always add it later, like the GH5 with a code. If you do decide to shoot in log, make sure you have enough space to work with them because the files are slightly bigger than normal footage. The other thing you need to know about shooting in log is that because of the desaturated nature of the footage, it looks all washed out and lacks contrast. It means that it's going to be difficult for you to lock your exposure. Getting the right exposure with log footage can be tricky. Now, because getting exposure right by just using the LCD monitor is very difficult with log footage, you need some tools to help you to get the right exposure. The two tools that are most commonly used in most cameras for getting the right exposure are your zebras or zebras, depending on how you pronounce that, and your waveform monitor. Zebras are diagonal lines that are superimposed on your image on the monitor, and they show you areas that are about to be or are already overexposed. You can set the threshold of those diagonal lines appearing in your menu system. By setting your threshold a bit lower than 100%, it means that you have some headroom in post-production if you ever need to raise the exposure without blowing out your highlights. So when you're shooting, whenever you see those diagonal lines appearing on your footage, then it means you need to dial down a little bit so that you don't blow out any of the footage. The second tool that is more technical that you can use to get your exposure right is called the waveform monitor. The waveform monitor is a representation of your image shown as brightness values instead of the actual image. The units on your waveform monitor are called IREs, and they range from 0, which is black, all the way up to 100, which represents white. When you go beyond 100, beyond the white, it means that your image is blown out and there is no recoverable detail that is available. And if you go below the 0 mark, it says this is pure black and there's no detail, and it doesn't matter how much you try and recover those details by raising your exposure in post-production, you will not get anything. So you need to make sure that when you are shooting, you adjust your image so that everything sits between 0 to 100, but with most things sitting somewhere in the middle. So make sure when you are shooting in log, you learn how to expose it properly using those tools. Let's look at the process of getting your footage from shooting all the way to something that is usable. The first stage in working with log footage is to normalize it. In other words, fix it so that the colors look natural. This process is called color correction. It is here where you set your white balance if that was not set correctly. This is also the stage where you add back the contrast and the saturation to the levels that look normal. Once you have color corrected your footage and it looks normal, you are now ready to go on to the second stage, which is the creative part of coloring, and this is called color grading. Color grading is giving your footage a certain stylistic look. But color grading relies heavily on footage that is correctly color corrected. So you need to get that first part of color correction right before you move on to color grading. Both color correction and color grading your log footage can be done manually. So you can go into your panel that you use to do your coloring of your image and move the different sliders around so that your footage looks natural, and then do the same thing as you are color grading now to push your image towards a more stylistic look. But these two processes have been made easier by the introduction of LUTs. LUT stands for lookup table. What LUTs do is basically provide you with a drag and drop way of color correcting and color grading. The two types of LUTs that you get that you can use on your footage are one, the technical LUTs, and two, the creative LUTs. Technical LUTs are the ones that you use to convert your log footage into the most natural looking footage for you to use. Creative LUTs, on the other hand, move that process into the color grading stage where you want to make your footage look a certain way. And so those are stylistic changes that you make to the footage to just make it look a certain way. Now, because different companies, different manufacturers have different log color profiles, you need to make sure that the LUT that you are using to convert your footage matches the camera that you are using. Now, for some people, once you convert your log footage, that's about all that they need to do because the footage already looks good enough for the purposes that they want to use it for. But for other people, they want to continue to tweak that so that they get a specific look. Creative LUTs rely heavily on properly color corrected footage. So before you drop any creative LUT on your footage, make sure that the colors are as natural as possible, that you've done the first stage of color correcting well so that all the colors are represented properly before you move on to your color grading using either manual means or dropping a LUT. Color correction and color grading specifically is a profession all of its own and is very technical. For most of us, all we need is to just shoot our log footage, drop a technical LUT that converts that log footage to a natural looking Rec 709, and then just pick another look from our creative LUTs to make the footage look the way we want it to look. Colorists go way beyond that. It's a highly technical field that you might actually be interested in going into. And that's it, an introduction to shooting log and color correcting, color grading, and using LUTs. Hopefully that's enough to get you started and interested in a different way of shooting and post-production processes. See you next time on Tech Booth.